I've been in this business for a while. I've been involved with AE for quite a while, for 25. You just kind of stop, it sounds really good on proposals and things until you get to 25. Then it's like, well, no, over 25. So I don't need to get into the gruesome details of how far over anymore. So I have worked my career in a variety of places for state energy offices, doing energy efficiency education programs, or just energy efficiency programs, training building operators. I put together the building operator certification program that's now going around the country in a lot of different places. It started with an education program for people that run the buildings that are not engineers. So we have got a variety of engineers. There was really nothing for the people that really are controlling the dials on these buildings and making them perform or not perform. And so I kind of started there on the commercial energy education piece. I worked for a utility company doing energy efficiency programs and actually running programs. Worked for state government running schools and hospital programs. And then I've gotten into a lot of energy accounting and resource management types of activities. And it kind of started with, I was giving grants away to schools and hospitals and inspecting projects, and I'd come back and say, hey, are you saving anything? And they, oh yeah. I said, well, how much? Well, it must be quite a bit. You gave us $100,000. So, well, yeah, but how much are you saving? So yeah, nobody was looking. So I started some early spreadsheets just to track this stuff. Starting to look with utility bills. And it started to tell a pretty good story. And I started just doing it on spreadsheets, and then I got involved with a couple of companies at State Energy Office and a couple of companies that did energy accounting software. And I'm one of these energy geeks. I find it intriguing. I love the data. I truly love the data. I track my home utility bills, water, wastewater, solid waste, energy, on an energy management tracking program. I can benchmark my house, and when I go to sell houses, which I have several times, the realtor go, what are the energy bills like? Well, here's a pie chart of how everything breaks out, and how it looks, and how much I've spent, and they put that into the report, and our houses have always sold real well. So that's why I put this session together to kind of take you on a journey through how do you use the data. First, I'm going to talk about just getting the data, the kind of data that you want, how you put it together. We're going to focus just on energy data rather than resources this afternoon. And then Sadie is going to come up and talk about the next step of, all right, you take that data, how do I get it to decision makers? How do I get people to take action? What are their behaviors like, and how do they react to the data, and how can I get them to do something with it? We've all walked through a lot of buildings, done energy audits. One of the most frustrating things is nobody takes action on what you've done, and we've all been there. And so we're trying to move that forward. So Sadie's going to talk about the behavioral science side of things. Amanda's going to take it a step further and say, all right, now how do we turn this into doing some projects from organization-wide? So within the organization, how can I take the data? We'll keep building on things, take the behavior science. Who do I need to talk to? How do I present the data? Let's come up with some budgets. Let's get some projects rolling. Let's get some utility incentives. So she'll talk about a few good case studies of how that's turned out. And then finally, Jim will talk about, all right, let's expand that to an entire state. Kentucky has been doing amazing things in energy efficiency with the Kentucky schools. I've worked with two separate organizations with Jim. Now, they're doing amazing things statewide, and they're getting all their schools Energy Star certified for almost the entire state. It's fascinating, that you can actually take this stuff. And Jim will talk about some of the aspects of that, maybe involving students a little bit too, and taking it a step further. So without further ado, as I mentioned, it starts with the utility bills. So there's more on a utility bill than how much do we owe you and when's it due. And that's usually what everybody is focusing on. But really, as this thing shows, what I want to do and what you can do just with monthly utility bills and a good spreadsheet or a good program is I want to take the bill. I want to start to break out the end uses. I want to see trends of how this building uses energy over time. I want to see how they use energy monthly. I can start to break out the loads of what's air conditioning and what's base loads, and you keep asking questions about, all right, that's the base load. Well, what's in that? And then you start chunking it out just with some formulas and things like that. You can actually get to a light disaggregation of where the energy is going in a building just from the utility bills to help guide you on where you should start your efforts. And so what I want to talk about is just the steps for that initial facility assessment. We'll talk about collecting the information and what we're looking for when we review the bills. You're not looking for everything, but there's there's a way to set this up. And when I start looking at utility bills, I like to set it up and so I can hand it to somebody and they can keep tracking once I'm gone. Whether it's a spreadsheet or a resource management software program, something like that, but you give them the tools, because it takes a lot to collect some of this stuff sometimes and make sense of it. We'll talk about benchmarking sites, of just figuring out, are you good, bad? Where are you on this scale? And most people don't know where their buildings are. They think they're all really good if you ask them. Maybe they got an incentive for something, but they don't know how they compare to other organizations, even within their own portfolio, or across the state, or across the country. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Start to analyze the data. What can I tell from a monthly utility bill? Yes, there are some limitations, but there's a lot there in the right hands and the right tools that you can start to figure out where energy is going and what steps should I be taking. And then we'll talk about just the results and recommendations a little bit of just what things can I change. So collecting the information. So on utility bills, I want to get copies of the bills. Sounds so easy. How many people have collected utility bills in the course of your career here and there? Okay, so maybe half of us. Sounds like the easiest thing in the world to do. And it's like pulling teeth, man. It can be really challenging just with people that are even motivated to do it. It's just they don't get you all the bills, or they're missing bills, or you don't ever talk to the right person, and it takes a long time just to get that information. Or they don't want to give you a utility release to go right to the utility company, or they'll point you to a utility website, which is great, that has their stuff on it, but they may not have images of the bills. And so, I found a case, I'll show you something, but I've got to go through half a dozen different screens because the utility company website, for instance, was set up by an IT guy, not by a person that knows energy data. So I have to go different places for the KWH, the KW, and the cost, for instance. I still don't know where the meter number is because that's not on there anywhere. So all these pieces are just spread out all over. So I want to get that. I want to look at rate schedules. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. The facility information, I need the square footage of the building, just the basics. And even that can be like pulling teeth sometimes too. Or they'll have different vernacular of, if I go to a office real estate management company, for instance, and ask them for the square footage, they're going to give me the leasable square footage, not the total gross square footage. So I want the gross square footage. Those hallways do take energy. The elevator banks do take energy. So all that stuff. And so when you're trying to benchmark, you have to have a standardization for comparison purposes. I need to know, what kind of building is it? A school uses a different amount of energy than an industrial site, than an office building, than a hospital. They're all different, and they have different benchmarks. So I need to know who I'm working with. And there are some other Energy Star attributes, if that's of interest to people, which it is these days. That's a good, easy way to get at least a basic national comparison of where you stand in relation to other types of buildings that are similar, if they're in the Energy Star Portfolio Manager set of buildings. There are some caveats doing that too. The way they get that data, they might have 2 buildings in a state of that type, and so that's where they'll come up with their benchmark. So it all depends on that. So it may not be very accurate, and so there's a couple of different things that you should look at in addition to that. But if that's important, there are attributes that you want to get. And I just put a list of some of the attributes, and it varies by building, but the types of things that you want, what's the percent heated and cooled, when was it built, what type of heating system do you have, what type of fuels do you have, those sorts of things. So when I'm entering and reviewing the utility bills, I need to first identify all the accounts. Even that is a challenge. I I succeeded. I won't say I tried. I did succeed. It took a while. Setting up King County, the whole county organization in Seattle. And I worked for the utility company at the time. I had access to not all their data, because there's a few utilities serving that. But I had most of it because we had gas and electricity, but in the city of Seattle it was electric only, so we didn't have that. So I'd have to get it. But just to come up with a list of all their accounts in our system was not as easy as find this customer, what's all their bills. They'll build a building, and the contractor will say, oh, that's King County, so I call it King County. Oh, it's the Department of Justice, so the account name is Department of Justice, not King County. There's no link there. And so they didn't even have a list of all of their accounts. So I couldn't go one place and just say, hey, give me all your accounts and meters. Years later, we were still finding accounts and buildings that nobody knew about. And, you know, they got thousands and thousands of accounts in a big organization like a county or something like that. But even that can be a challenge. But you got to start, and you just have to start chipping away at it. And then organizing all the consumption data. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And then the billing detail review. You're not going to get into line by line items, and I'll talk about a couple things, but that you should do, you should look for, and kind of what triggers that. But what I focus on in this first round, this first view of things that you can do something about that don't cost a lot of money, and I'll show you some examples of what that is. So you kind of go into it with that thought that you're not looking at, you know, going out and purchasing power somewhere else, or, you know, doing something like that. These are just easy things that you can look for. And then we'll look at the rate schedule reviews. I'll talk about some things that might trigger a review of a rate schedule. Most of the time you're not doing that, just make sure they're on the right one. But the first thing is to locate all the meters on a plot plan. So I usually start, you know, if I'm doing an individual facility, I'll start with a plot plan like this. I'll get the buildings down there. Then I need the square footages on the buildings. I need locate all the meters and just draw them on there somewhere. You know, I see a fuel oil fill pipe sticking out of the ground. Nobody mentioned that. It's like, what are you doing with fuel oil? You know, that's an energy. It goes somewhere. This place, they have a natural gas meter too. So is this a backup boiler, or are you on a some sort of an interruptible gas schedule, for instance, and they'll have backup fuel in order to qualify to get on that schedule. Do you use it? Most places will burn a tank of oil a year just to keep the oil flowing through it. You don't want to let that sit there for years and years and years, even if you never had to use it. So they will use at least a tank. But I need to know how they use that and what they're using it for, and then find the fill slips. So fill slips, even if they're using it all the time, they're once every whenever they need it filled. You know, so it's not like there's a read date or anything like that of when they used it. They might fill it up and not use it until the following winter. You know, or they could fill it up in springtime when oil is cheap, for instance. So you need to put those pieces together. Then I need to know what is the area that these meters are serving. So just because a meter is attached to a building doesn't necessarily mean it's serving that building. And so this, in this case here, there was a meter on a board out front. They added a gymnasium, and it went back there. This meter here, they had some other buildings here. Well, does it serve those too? No, that's some portables. That's on with the main building. So you need to, you know, this is a school example, but you know, any example is like that. You just need to know. You get into lease space or a big warehouse building or something like that. It might have several meters on it. They're leasing space to different clients. You know, those are the things that I want to make sure that that meter that I'm being charged for is actually serving the space that I'm leasing. Because I have found places that they're using the wrong meters, and you know, if you're not the energy hog, that's okay. But if you are, you got to be careful, because it may or may not be yours. So I start by just putting them on a spreadsheet. I want the electric usage, the gas usage, the kilowatt hours, the therms. If I got fuel oil, I'll add that. I want the gallons. I convert all that stuff to BTUs. We add that all together and divide by the square footage to get the energy use index in BTUs per square foot per year. That is my first initial look at how efficient is this building. And if it's outrageous, you know, that number, you get a feel for what those numbers are. You know, so I know if an office building is, you know, it's going to be from 80 to 100,000, say, BTUs per square foot per year in a certain climate. And it doesn't change that much in the United States. Systems will affect it more than the location, because where heating tapers off in the northern states as you head south, air conditioning picks up. And, you know, there's the BTU per square foot ranges they're similar, but they're a little bit different. So it's nice to get a state-by-state comparison. And Energy Information Administration has a lot of those good benchmarks if you know where to go in and dig for them and get them. But that's the first thing that I want to do. Then I want to look at the bills. So as I'm inputting the bills, and I key in a lot of bills, I still do, things that I'm looking for. So some of them that you can see here, non-recurring charges. So what was that? And it might just be on a bill that says non-recurring charge. Well, it could be a late fee. And so I have found, I just did some, I got some examples here. You know, you're looking for please pay immediately, overdue bill. You know, they're big bills to have overdue. You're going to get hundreds of dollars a month, if not thousands of dollars a month in late fees. If I'm an energy manager coming in and I say, you know, my goal is to save some money, if I can just get them to pay their bills on time, that buys a whole lot of sub-meters and other things they were saying that they couldn't afford, but nobody's paying attention to the fact that, you know, this one organization spent $5,000 a year just on late fees. You know, that's something I can do something about. It's like, you know, then why aren't you paying your bills? Unused meters. So as I'm entering data, if I see a meter number and a usage, and like this case here was therms and gas charges. I'm seeing gas charges. I'm seeing 0 therms month after month after month, and if you go through at least a year, I want at least a year's worth of bills. I like a couple years or 2 or 3 years because there's more you can get out of it in the trending than just 12 months. But if I see this going by with 0, it's like, why do you have this meter? And I've found them in gas and electric meters. Electric meters, it might be a fire pump, something like that they have to have it. They might test it once a year or something like that, but it might just be serving that, and there's nothing you can do about that. It just has to be there. But I found gas meters that, the meter may or may not even be there anymore. They don't even know it's hooked up. They've put in another central system from something else, and that's just $30, $40 a month just going down the tubes. That's something I can do something about. Power factor charges. Clint and I were just talking about that. But usually that's not a big part of your bill in most organizations, but one organization he was talking to just did an LED lighting retrofit, and all of a sudden their bill went up. One per one lighting retrofit, and didn't understand why. Well, they're billing on KVA. Power factor, I'm not going to get into it here. If you ever looked at power factor billing, every utility is completely different. Some of them you can tell if you got a problem. Some of them you can't. They'll adjust your demand. They'll bill on KVA. They'll bill on kVAR hours. They'll bill on kVARs. It's not consistent across the country at all. And sometimes you can't even tell if you had a power factor penalty. Now, one place to look is if you've got actual demand and billed demand. Those two things, if those are significantly different, that could be where the power factor is accounted for. But that's something you may be able to do something about, or maybe not. But that you can correct it. There are different ways to do it, and it just depends. If the penalty is high, it may be worth fixing. If the penalty is low, don't worry about it. But in this case here, it had an impact doing a lighting retrofit where they expected a completely different result. The rate schedule review. I like to just find the current rate schedule, just figure out what they're supposed to be on. Most often, they're on the right rate schedule, but occasionally they may change, or they may have moved their usage to another rate schedule, either higher or lower, if they add in an addition to the building. And rate schedules typically are in chunks. It might be if you're less than 50 or less than 100, you're on a small business rate schedule, and we're not billing demand at all, even reading it. If you're in 100 to 250 or 350 or something like that, you're in a band. If you're greater than 350, you're in a band, or if something like that. So you want to see where you are. If you've done a bunch of energy retrofits, which I have seen some buildings that are right on the border of where those rates change, it may or may not be advantageous to alert the utility that you're on the wrong rate schedule. You want to call, Sadie used to do this for a living at Puget Sound Energy in the Seattle area. And I have done some where they went down to a lower rate schedule because they reduced their consumption so much, but it was actually more expensive. And so it's like, I would just, as an energy manager, I just want to know whether to keep my mouth shut or go complain, one or the other. But you need to, that information, I would rather have it before somebody else gets it. But it's those sorts of things. The riders and the supplementary schedules, usually you're not doing anything with that. That's where your conservation riders are, paying for programs, utility programs, and things like that. And there can be a big laundry list of supplements, but usually you're not doing something about that. Interruptible rates. So if I find an oil tank out there, I want to look and check their interruptible rate. We did one project that saved enough money on their natural gas that they weren't meeting the minimum annual requirement for their interruptible rate, so they were paying penalties on it. And so they didn't realize it. We're doing great. We've done all these projects, but it pushed them out of a good rate that they had in the past, but they're not meeting the minimums. And so it was more cost effective for them to go to another non-interruptible rate. And then all of a sudden now it's, we don't have to deal with the fuel oil anymore. I don't have to maintain this. I don't have to, maintain 2 burners on my boilers. It's a whole bunch of good things that happen, and they save money on it. So that's something that they can do something about that's easy. If you're in a municipality that is growing constantly, we have seen this, and it goes both ways, that you get taken over by a larger city, incorporated into it. They may have other taxes that go on top of it, and the utility may not notice that for years. And then all of a sudden they come back and say, hey, you owe us $20,000 in taxes. The city will come back and say, hey, utility, you haven't been collecting these taxes for our new territory. We want our money. And we have had that happen to us, and it's a mess. But I would rather know that before than be hit with a big back bill. If you're a nonprofit, for instance, some nonprofits, depends on the utilities and rate schedule, don't have to pay taxes. And a lot of them are paying taxes because nobody took it out of their rate calculation. And so that's why I kind of look at those line items and say, hey, I want a tax refund. State law and the utility commission says I don't have to pay taxes if I'm this little blood bank down the corner or something like that. So I want to understand how the customer does things like that. So things to look for: significant alterations that really change your KW profile typically is where those bands change. If I moved significantly, I want to look at that. Efficiency upgrades will push you one way or another. Annexation, nonprofit status. Now benchmarking. So I want to benchmark buildings in BTUs per square foot, cost per square foot, cost per student, whatever makes sense in your organization. You start to look at that and see what are people going to respond to. And Sadie will get into this a little bit more, and Amanda both, of what does this organization need to make decisions, and what's going to motivate them to do something. And so I want to put all those. It's nice to put them on one place. You need different comparisons. This one has BTUs per square foot, Energy Star score, a cost per square foot or cost per student. Different ways to present the information is key. So I want to find out. I want to be able to rank a portfolio. So a spreadsheet is good for one or two buildings. You get more than that, you need some energy accounting or some resource accounting software. It makes it much easier to do that kind of stuff. I like this one here. This is just, I think, BTUs per square foot with a ranking across my portfolio. I just want to know where are my least efficient buildings so I can kind of target those for some improvements. This one here has Energy Star scores. And so the reason I like this one is it tells you the reds are bad as you come up. It tells you these are close to being Energy Star qualified. Maybe you want, if that's important to the organization. Again, Sadie will kind of talk on people's buttons that you want to push. But what motivates them to take action? So if they've got a bunch that are close and they like the Energy Star, the public likes the Energy Star when they see it, that's important for just promoting the efforts that you're doing. Let's focus on these ones that are close, and then here's others that are way over, and it gives you your average Energy Star score. This particular group of buildings here is a bunch of really efficient buildings, but pretty impressive. The next thing, I can take a monthly utility bills and just get a high-level savings estimate. So I kind of combine that with my energy use index. So if I know, say, a school in Seattle, for instance, should be 50,000 BTUs per square foot per year. Our average high school, I think, at the time was like 65,000. I've got one that's 85,000. There could be a reason for it, but not knowing that at least helps me get some targets. So, all right, what if I just did some O&M stuff? You can pretty much save 5% on any building, whether it's efficient or not, coming in and focusing on some operations and maybe some improved maintenance on key pieces of equipment. What is that worth? What's 5% of that bill? What if I just got down to the benchmark of just the norm? What's the average? And average is not good. You're as inefficient as the average building out there. That's still not good, but what if I took a high one and just got it to the average? What is that worth? Now, what if I got it to that Energy Star level or towards the upper end of what the savings potential is? I need to know that number. That's good to kind of protect yourself from contractors overstating what the savings might be. So you look at, all right, what's realistic for this particular building or portfolio of buildings? How much can I save? And then the next thing is, how much do I want to spend to get there? And so if you got I'll ask them their payback criteria. Say, well, no, if we got a 3-year payback, we'll totally do it. Say, fine. You can save $50,000 a year. Looks like to me, if you got up to here, 3 times that is $150,000 for a 3-year payback. So I'm looking for projects that I can do for $150,000 or less. It kind of focuses, then here's a $500,000 project. I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to talk somebody into that right off the bat because I know it won't be funded. But this meets their criteria. Their CFO told me that they would do these things. And so that kind of helps you, just by looking at the utility bills, get a ballpark figure of what you might be looking for. Then you want to figure out which sites should I be looking for. Amanda, you recognize these? This is a great chart. I love this one. Where you, by color and by size of a portfolio of buildings, the bigger the size, the bigger the square footage. The more red the color, the more inefficient that it is. So I'm looking for big red squares. And we have been to a lot of trainings where we have basically told CFOs, superintendents, high-level people, they respond to this more than they do pages and pages of data. This just zeroes right in. It's like, wow. Like in this school district here, I can see they've been neglecting their middle schools for a long time. those are all the energy hogs. So they've been spending money on new elementary schools and remodeling of high schools, and it just let the middle schools go. And if you've ever worked in schools, you know that middle school kids are terror on schools. Man, they're tough. They're hard on buildings at that age level. I don't know why, but they just are. But you need something that demonstrates, where should I focus. Now we'll talk about analyzing the data a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is just get energy and cost. And so you see the comparison of where's my energy chunk going, where's my energy cost going. And depends on what the goals are for the organization. If I want to reduce my energy footprint, I'll focus on energy. That might be natural gas. Natural gas is relatively cheap energy per BTU, cheaper than electricity is, usually by 3-4 times. So do I want to save energy or do I want to save money? Usually it's I want to save money. So you're focusing on electric baseload most of the time. But that helps you do that. So you have different ways of presenting this information. I'm looking for impacts of weather and just anomalies and strange things. I'll show you a couple examples of that in a minute here. So I might just look at the electric bill, either on an annual basis is usually better than a monthly basis. But if I were to look at something like this and see reactive power is just 2%, so I was saying, I'm probably not going to worry about that. But if it's all of a sudden it's 10%, 12%, 15%, whoa, it's worth looking at that to do something about it. Demand is the same thing. I've seen some demand that can be half of the electric bill. And so I'm going to focus more on kW than I am on kilowatt hours. If kilowatt hours is the big driver in the energy side of it, I'm going to focus on kilowatt hours. And there are different approaches as you go to either one of those. You're going to do different measures that will save either kW or more kilowatt hours. But it's just helpful just kind of knowing that. I want to start to show the interaction between fuels. I like to know, so I have asked people for data. They will just send me the electric data and ignore natural gas. I got to see the whole picture. Just how the fuels relate to each other, because that also tells a different story of what energy you've got and what you're using and how you're using it. Is it heating only? Using it for hot water? What are you using for hot water? I found where they're using electric resistance heaters for hot water and they've got gas to the building. It's like, why would you do that? This is costing you 3 times as much for your hot water. It may not be a big load, but you're still paying 3 times as much for that BTU.
Before you get off that,
yes, sir.
One thing that I've always worried about there is we say per month some cases, and the bill doesn't necessarily mean January's consumption.
Yeah.
And that January may be 27 days and February may be 35 days.
Yep.
But in some cases, I just saw that funny little bump there.
Yeah, well, exactly. So
you go,
no, that's a good point. So what that leads to is I investigate the anomalies. I see something like that. All right, is it a shorter billing period? If you use energy accounting software, it will prorate things into monthly bins. And so I need to know if that's going on, but that's an excellent point. And then you might have some nonprofits will be on a residential rate schedule and bi-monthly billing. So I don't really know, that's a pretty wide time frame. So, but yeah, again, this is just your first high-level look. Yes, sir.
Play into that heating degree days.
So I might do this if I'm doing that. Thank you for the lead-in. So here's a couple of different ways to look at that. So yeah, I want to look at, I like doing this slope here of this average daily temperature and kilowatt hours or therms. And it's just kind of doing a little regression. It just shows you the steeper that line is, the more sensitive it is to weather. Relatively flat line, doesn't matter what the temperature is out there. As that line gets steeper, one way or the other, it's either heating or cooling, then I want to pay more attention to that system. And then how far is that line off the deck? If the line is way down low, then it's my heating or cooling system is causing me the most grief. And I'm spending the most money there. If that line is way high, I want to look at base loads. So it's lighting and things that are on all the time, 12 months a year. And so you start asking yourself those questions. But yeah.
We had some distribution that was pretty wide, and we separated the heating degree days and the cooling degree days.
Yep.
And found out that the building was more sensitive in the heating season than
Yeah.
the cooling season.
Yeah, and usually you get, it depends on what you.
Otherwise, you get a big get a good correlation.
Yeah. Yeah, so you do gas and electric separately, and again, you're asking, how am I heating this building? How am I cooling it? Do I have any, gas chillers or anything like that, or things that could throw off what I might think is normal? But yeah, you start to at this high level, just see the impacts of weather. If weather looks like it's impacting, then I want to look at those systems a little more closely. Energy use trends. This is why I like to have more than 12 months worth of data, because I can see the trend here, the trend line. You'll take this tells me I've got another 12 months of data before this just to get this first dot. So that's the total or the average of the previous 12 months. Now, whatever you do that last month will cause it to go up or down. And so I want to know, is this going up or down? Is it relatively flat? Most buildings will stay relatively flat regardless of the weather, unless something happens. If you do a retrofit, it should come down, and then once the retrofit has been there for 12 months, it should flatten out again. So just another different way of looking at things. Here's one I found just looking at a office building, and it had more than a year's worth of data. And I start looking at this and say, all right, here's how it looks. Whoa, what's going on here? And I called the building owner until I was actually teaching an auditing class, and we were just going to use the guy's building for a demo. And I'd never been in the building before, and that's most cases. You haven't been in these buildings. You're just looking at data. And looked up and saw, all right, you've got a dual duct system. They left the boiler on that summer, so the hot deck was not ambient anymore. That's where they were bringing their cold air, their makeup air in. And so the cold deck then was balancing out that extra hot deck, and so they're simultaneous heating and cooling. That's the problem with the dual duct system if it's not controlled properly. And so that's what was going on there. But those sorts of things that showed up. The guy was very grateful that I found it. He was a little pissed off at his building operator because he didn't shut the boiler down, and it had gone on for several months, but he corrected it long after. And then the last thing I want to find out in this initial utility bill review is, do you have interval data capability on any of your meters? They may or they may not. Do you have, can you get it from the utility company? Do they provide it? Do they charge for it? Some utilities will do it for free. Smart meters have that level of data if you can get it out. And then can I get it out of their system into something that I can use it with, or do they have an online system that I can look at it? But you want to start to play with that. That tells you the operational, what's going on in this building on a 15-minute interval basis, usually. They might be 30 minutes, might be an hour, depends on the type of meter and the size. But, if I want to figure out, all right, here's my peak for this month. Now, if I want to drill in on that, okay, now I know that at 5 o'clock in the morning I'm setting my peak. And so is there something I can do with that? If it's some sort of electric system, heating or cooling, you can use a lot more energy to lower that ramp. If I can lower my demand, you can use a lot of kilowatt hours usually of starting earlier without the intensity and save money. You haven't saved any energy at all. You're still going to get those BTUs into that space. But if you do it more slowly versus more quickly, it might save you some money on demand costs. So that's something to look at there. Then you look at what happens at the end of the day as it tapers down. Do I have a custodial staff working in there? People leaving. What happens at night? And you start to get some benchmarks. I've looked at certain types of buildings of how low can this go at night. So a school building, for instance, should get down to a half a watt a square foot. Ballpark, right in there somewhere. So if it's a watt per square foot, I know most school buildings can use less than that. If an office building is generally about a watt per square foot. And so I can tell, looking at interval data, what I think the building size should be, even if I don't know what the building size is. So, all right, this looks like it should be a 50,000 square foot building. If this is a 20,000 square foot building, you've got some potential. If it's 100,000, you're doing a good job shutting down at night. EUI may not be good, but you're doing good operationally on that. And then to keep using that over time and look for those operational improvements. Here's an example of, the more data you have comparing to the year before. This is the previous year. This is the next year. See, all of a sudden that baseline jumped up. And a lot of times people will do a retrofit. They got it down low, but no one is watching from an M&V standpoint to see if those savings persisted over time. And so you get somebody watching that, and somebody pointed it out. Somebody found it, said, hey, what's going on here? You're not shutting down. The operator found out what it was, shut it down. You can tell exactly the day that he shut it down, and then all of a sudden I'm back to normal again. And then a year later, I'm still down below where I was. So they're doing a good job of maintaining that. So it's those kinds of tools that you can look at interval data on a 15-minute basis and figure out kind of where you're at operationally.
So if you've got a building that has interval data and you want to consider putting a meter on it,
Yep.
Without knowing what that meter data is, how can you economically justify it?
There are different ways. So the utility, they can put cards in their meters and just leave you a lead. And it might cost $1,500 or something like that. They can put a card in the meter, 2 little wires coming out to a J-box, and then it's low voltage signal. You do with it what you want. Bring it into your energy management control system, something like that. That's usually the easy way to do it at a building level. There are companies out there that have, you can put CTs on places and you get data collectors, and then you can ship it out, then you get into software, and it gets into, you know, a bigger system than, they probably have their own presentment tool that you just get the data out, and then it gets there and you can look up online and do it. That gets more expensive, but there are companies that do that. So there are ways to do that are, you know, they're not that expensive, but nobody.
They've got a high base.
Yeah.
To find a meter.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, you put all that together. That's your point. You look at the EUI. You look at the cost per square foot. You look at how they're using energy. It's like, you know, I should probably, if I'm going to do that, that's all. I did that for a building with all the late fees. I said, look, pay your damn bills on time and put in. It buys a whole lot of interval meters. You can pay for these with your savings on that. You don't care about the late fees. You're approving a payment and letting it go, but you won't spend money on interval meters. So I found you your money. Let's put the interval meters in. So yeah, no, excellent point. So here's a summary of all the things you can do. Get the complete data, both facility and billing data. Look for things that you can do something about, like late fees and unused meters, those sorts of things. Benchmark your facilities. As I mentioned, Energy Information Administration has some raw data by, I think it's by state. It used to be by state. They might have it by region now. But there's a lot of data out there. We've got a guy that worked with Sadie and Amanda and I, that he finds good benchmarks for anything, anywhere. He's amazing. I don't know how he does it. But he starts there with Energy Information Administration. Energy Star is another good one that will regionalize it or normalize it for a particular state or an area. You know, there are a limited number of building sets of building types, but you know, that's a good first step. But then, you know, still look at that further, because it may or may not be the best thing to do. Take that information, estimate a savings potential. You know, and even knowing their total bill, you know, you can start at the top. Say, all right, can you save all of it? No. Can you save half of it? Doubt it. You know, can you save 10%? Well, yeah, I can save 10%. So you get into a range of what people think is achievable. You fine-tune that with your expertise on where the energy use index is and where you think it could be. That'll help drive it a little bit more and help people at least put their mind around what the savings potential is, and then what the economic criteria is to go get those savings and how much they might want to spend. You can do self-funding projects pretty easy that way if you kind of have an idea. Graph the profiles, you know, take a look at the weather, take a look at the way they do things, the way the building uses energy, evaluate for interval capability. You know, that's great information to have. Once you started playing around with that stuff, it's wonderful. You know, I love that. You can tell so much. We started doing this. We had a friend that worked for the utility company, and you know, just as a joke, and you know, she said, "Yeah, go ahead." So I looked at her data, and I think, you know, it was before she was married, and I can say, "Oh man." She was at home on Valentine's Day. Looks like she was watching TV late, you know. And she said, that is true. That is exactly what I was doing. She has since married and has a child and is happily married. So that's good. But it's amazing. You know, one guy asked me, he's like, can you use this to figure out why Cal can't make it to an 8 o'clock meeting? And I looked in, and I said, yeah, because Cal stays up till 3 o'clock in the morning listening to music. He's got a great media system because he's using a lot of energy in the wee hours of the morning, and he hangs out, you know. And that's exactly what he did. So he ain't getting up at 8 o'clock. You know, I can tell you right now, just looking at this. Yeah, and there's other incriminating things you can find with that on a residential basis, but you know, it's kind of fun to look at that. And then when you're looking at the interval data, look at the posted hours. You know, it's like you're open 8 to 5. You know, why are you warming up or cooling down your building at 3 o'clock in the morning and nobody's coming in until 8? And you can see when people come in, because then lights and other loads start to pick up. So you can tell when people are coming into the building without doing CO2 sensors or something like that. So you're looking for those operational improvements. As it has been for a long time, figure out when people are not in the building and turn things off is your easiest first step of generating some energy and cost savings. And so you're kind of looking for those. Interval data help tremendously in that. And then summarize all your findings. You know, what are the operational things that you see? You know, here's what it looks like, how you use energy throughout the year, throughout the day. Here's kind of how your costs are. You put all that together in a little report for them, and just using 12 months worth of utility bills can tell a big story and get people motivated if you reach them the right way and show them the right things and put them in the right format. Any questions? How much time do I have, Sadie?